Well, he was sworn in December of 2020, promising bold reform. And today we're going to check in on how things are going. I'm delighted to be joined by District Attorney George Gascon.
Hello,
nice
Maria.
to have you here.
Maria, so good to see you.
Because the pursuit of justice must be timeless. And that is why we will work to correct the injustices of the past.
You just put out a midterm report for this year, and you outlined several key areas and outcomes. What do you consider to be the highlights of that report?
I think the highlights of the report is we're seeing crime beginning to go back down to pre-pandemic periods. So it's very rewarding for me to affirm the fact that we said from the very beginning that, public safety and reform actually travel together and they can be complementary to one another. During the time when I was sworn in, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and nationally we saw an increase in crime. And unfortunately, it coincided with my being sworn in and the implementation of a lot of this reform. And now seeing crime going back to pre-pandemic period, I think is incredibly rewarding for me, and it's an affirmation that we're on the right path.
Handling cases that should not go to jail/prison, especially when it comes to addiction or self-imposed harm. How are the opportunities presenting themselves for alternate therapy, for alternate help?
Yeah.
How is that policy and process? Are there alternates being put in place for the amount of people that need that help?
We're working very closely with all the stakeholders, including law enforcement as well as community-based organizations and our board of supervisors, to increase the capacity to provide for the intervention that is appropriate for people that have mental health issues, substance dependence, a combination of two. We continue to be challenged, of course, with the not sufficient resources, right? So much of what we deal with is impacted by mental health. If you talk to anyone, would tell you that easily at least 40% of the people that are in county jail every day have some level of mental health problems, some of them very acute. And often our prosecutors are faced with really poor options, right? We have somebody that cannot be released on the street because they may be dangerous at that moment or they have other issues. We recognize that they have a mental health problem. The best place for them would be a treatment facility that has, that is a secure facility, but we don't have ability for that sometimes, and then we end up sending the person to jail. It compounds the problem, though, because not only is the jail not the place to deal with this problem, but then we also are facing a jail overcrowding problem, right? So the sheriff, on the other hand, is facing the reality that he has to release people, sometimes even if he may not want to, because we're over capacity every single day. So it becomes a very delicate dance.
So what safeguards are you putting in to understand the difference between who should be released and who shouldn't be released? Because frankly, that's a huge focus on the office at large.
Yeah, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that in our business, mistakes are made every day,
Sure.
right? We have a recidivism rate that is somewhere around 70% system-wide. And I'm not talking about LA District Attorney's Office, I'm talking about as a nation, right? So every time that somebody reoffends after the system touches them, it's a failure, right? So it's really important to understand that unfortunately we deal with, number one, we deal with human beings, which, predicting behavior from human beings is often is hard. And we come from a place of a tremendous amount of imperfection, right? So I think the baseline is a baseline of imperfection, right? Not a baseline of perfection.
And let's go to the juvenile sentencing,
Right.
and that a juvenile should stay in juvenile court despite the level of his crime, her crime.
So, this is really an area where it's really important to understand the science and understand the effectiveness of our work, right? 95% of the people that we send to prison or jail are coming back out. When you take a 15, 16-year-old and you put them in a jail setting, generally, when they come back out, and generally they come back out, they're still very young and strong, they don't do much better. So it's really important that we understand that, you know, the human brain is not fully developed until we're into our mid-20s. And I jokingly say that when it comes to guys, until we're in our 50s. But,
I'll agree with you there.
yeah, thank you. but the point is understanding what the right level of intervention. And that's not to say that a juvenile will never be tried as an adult, and we have done some, but that should not be the rule. That should be the exception, and that should be driven by a whole host of considerations. Not simply the crime, but, you know, the state of mind of the individual, level of maturity, the circumstances around the case. There are many things that play a role in that.
Locking up kids has never been shown to enhance public safety, but has been shown to significantly increase a young person's likelihood of committing future offenses. Locking up kids doesn't help, it hurts.
Where are we with the juvenile detention system? Has there been inroads to be able to improve that so that when you do make those decisions and you put those individuals into the juvenile detention system because of the crimes that they have committed, are we creating a better human, or are we just holding a person and letting them go and see what happens next?
We have a severe problem with our juvenile probation, and we have seen some people are calling it gladiator school, right? I mean, the way that kids are being thrown into a setting, poor supervision, just lack of resources, very little rehabilitation. We are at a crisis moment in the county. The governor made a decision a few years ago that the state was no longer going to be in the business of holding juveniles that were serious offenders in the state system. And the concept was a good concept, to bring it back to a community-based treatment and custody. Unfortunately, because of often political bickering, quite frankly, about not in my backyard, where do you put the center, how do you build it, we now are here. These kids, the state now has basically released everybody back to the counties. Some of these kids have severe problems, and they committed very serious crimes. And we are really at a crisis mode now. I have to say that by and large, the Board of Supervisors are working really hard trying to correct this, but this is trying to fix a flat tire while the car is going 100 miles an hour downhill.
Are you a different man sitting here with me now than you were when you took the oath on December 8th?
Maria, I don't know if you remember this, but I think I mentioned the fact that I continue to evolve every day. I talked about my own evolution. And I am definitely a different person today than I was 2 years ago. And I would hope that when you and I get together a year from now, that I would be a different person today. And here's what I mean by that. I'm not talking about principles and your basic ethical compass. I think that, in my opinion, needs to be very well centered, and it should be constant. But I believe that it's a hallmark of a good human being to continue to learn, to be reflective, to learn from past mistakes, to seek new information. And clearly I have done a great deal of growth and learning in the last 2 years, and I would hope that it will be the case a year from now as well.
So if people want to find out about this work and get to know you more and get to know your office better and understand what issues and policies are active and being done by your office, best place?
If you just Google Los Angeles District Attorney, you're going to see our website will pop up. You'll see all of our policies. Also, you're increasingly seeing our dashboards that actually show the number of cases that are being filed, the cases that are being presented by the police, what the conviction rate. So we're putting more and more information out there. So I encourage people to go there and take a look.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking this precious time. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you back.
Maria, my pleasure. Look forward to next year.
Thank you.
Take care.
And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.